Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Coleman. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now, you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And I live in South Hadley, so I love the history of this island.
So today, Rob will be educating us on his center neighborhood of South Hadley. So what are the important features of the center?
Okay, important features, of course, must include the Mount Holyoke College, started by Mary Lyon in the year 1836, has a woman's seminary, a religious school, and of course includes the mountain range, which is the Mount Holyoke mountain range, topped by the Monadnock Trail. And the first of that mountain range, the Mount Holyoke mountain, is on its peak as a house. And that Summit House has been maintained through many, many years. And visitors upon visitors come out to visit Hadley for that house. And for the hiking, of course. Now, you can also boat. There's a marina in the center area. And there's the post office. And then there's beautiful Woodbridge Street, which is a street that almost every house on there is historic. And it was kept in a historic manner by Joseph Skinner, the son of William Skinner of Holyoke. And he developed it and kept it the way he wanted it to be. Also in the center, there's a golf course called the Orchards. It's named after the home of Joseph Skinner, who built this golf course for his daughter. Also in the center, there's a museum. There's the Art Museum of the college, and then there's a museum that Joseph Skinner wanted to have. So you have lots of beautiful things out in that center. Of course, there's lots of homes. Some are very old, and some are very new. So you got quite the gamut.
Now, what are the boundaries?
Okay, to the north is the Mount Holyoke Range, and that's true whether you go northeast, north, or northwest. And towards the east, you have the town of Granby. That boundary has shifted by about half a mile through the years. So the center has gotten a little bit smaller through the many years. Towards the south, you have at the bottom of the hill, where Morgan Street, past Morgan Street, when you go down to the school area, there's a traffic light, and that's symbolically the end of the center and the beginning of the Woodlawn neighborhood. And then towards the west, you have the Connecticut River defining it all the way along its edge.
Now, quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B.yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. They are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what is the history of the center?
Okay, now the history of the center is vast because it was part of Hadley in the very beginning, just like Granby was. And in 1721, the Preston family said we want to settle south of the Mount Holyoke Range, which no one had ever done. So this vast amount of land was free to expand into, and Hadley agreed that they can press outwards and become a village. By 1755, they said, we want to become our own town. So they petitioned the state government, and they allowed them to become a new town, South Hadley. Now, the history It includes many families moving into this area. Most of them moved around along the streets that you would identify: Woodbridge Street, Silver Street, Morgan Street, Ferry Street, Hadley Street. And there's still many old homes there. There's a couple of old homes right at the beginning of Woodbridge Street, called the Sycamores, where you can get to see, I think it's the second oldest house in Holyoke. And there were many churches. Most of those churches are gone now. They burned along the way. It includes a little village cemetery called the Old South Hadley Cemetery. And that ended up being moved between 1902 to 1904. And so it lost this quaint little cemetery, but that's in the backup now of Evergreen Cemetery. And of course, you develop along the way. You ended up having a college move in, Mount Holyoke College, which it started as a women's seminary, developed by 1890 into a true college, and it stayed for old women, and it hasn't missed a beat. It's developed along the way from a good local college to a national college to an international college. And so it's expanded, and it takes up quite a bit of space up there and quite a bit of the history. Now, I don't have to explain much because go on the internet or come to the Hadley History Room and pick up books, and you have books describe Hadley's history, and it's always the history of the center. And it ignores the plains and the woodland because those came later. And there's some about the falls because that developed from a canal village. And so any book that you have about South Hadley is going to talk mostly about the center. So Sophie Eastman wrote a beautiful book, and probably the best book about South Hadley, and she concentrated very heavily upon the center. So I don't have to describe much. You can just find a good book, and you'll have it in front of you.
So now tell us about the Mount Holyoke Range.
All right, the Mount Holyoke Range is the mountain range that is in the northern part of South Hadley. It separates it from Hadley, which is the parent town of South Hadley. It also separates it from Amherst, and it's a very important mountain range because if you go up there, it's one of the few mountain ranges in the United States where you can actually see the towns and cities around you. And so you get to see, even though it's only from 1,000 to 1,500 feet high, you get to see the surrounding land in a beautiful manner. And if you know history, how it developed, if you know geography, where exactly you're looking at. And that's very rare because most mountains in the United States are far away from towns and cities, and you don't get to see, oh, this is spread out before me, So if you go up to the Summit House in South Hadley, you get to see the farms of Amherst and the colleges up there. You get to see the farms of Northampton and also the commercial center. You get to see dams in the distance. You get to see Springfield and Hartford further away, and Westover Air Force Base, and South Hadley. And since South Hadley is not as organized, not as centered as most of the other places, because South Hadley was split in two into the center and the falls. So you get to see a lot up at that Mount Holyoke Range. Also, if you go to the other location of the South Hadley Range called the Notch, you get to go inside a visitor center there too, and you get to learn more about the geology of the area, the geography, and you can walk the whole expanse. I've walked both directions on the whole expanse of the whole Mount Holyoke Range, and it's beautiful. You get to go through different types of terrain, different types of biology. By that I mean trees and plants change along the way. And if you want to learn the start of geography, geology, and history, this is a great place to start. And pick up a geology book and learn about how this region was formed, and you get to understand why you're looking at certain rocks in certain places and how this even formed. It's an east to west mountain range, which is very rare in the United States because most mountain ranges are north to south. Thank you, though, for listening to this very good neighborhood tour.
Thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and we again want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune in to a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for all of his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
That's right, and as I live in South Hadley, I love these South Hadley tours.
Okay, so today Robert will be educating us on the Falls neighborhood of South Hadley. So tell us about the history of the Falls.
There's two major sections of South Hadley, and this is because the center was settled first, long before the Falls was settled. It was settled in 1721 by several families coming from Hadley. But by 1794, which was 73 years later, the Falls section would be settled, and it was settled because there was a need to navigate the Connecticut River from Long Island Sound up to northern Vermont. And to do that, you had to get by several places where there were rapids. And in South Hadley, there was the Hadley Falls, which was a large falls that was 60 feet drop. Now, to navigate falls, the easiest way is to build a canal around it, a skirting canal or a navigational canal. And they did that, and so the history of the falls is the history of getting that canal going. And this was the first navigational canal in the United States of a particular length. There might have been one earlier in Louisiana of a very short length. And now the history starts there, but everything started to boom at that point. Of course, where there's a village of workers, you start to need houses and schools and so forth, and everything boomed from that area. And so what we're going to describe here is some of the other features along the way. Of course, a cemetery is needed. Until 1839, the people that died were brought from this area of the falls up to the center until you had a cemetery built in the falls. Also, you had schools being built down here, churches being built down here, and you developed a whole new community. And so South Hadley is very rare in Hampshire County, where it has two very distinctive communities which grew up separate from each other and separated by over 4 miles. And that never happened in Hampshire County. It happened in other parts of the state, but it never really happened in Hampshire County to the extent that it happened in South Hadley.
So what are the present boundaries of the falls?
Okay, very important. The Connecticut River, of course, is the boundary to the west. And then the Chicopee border is the boundary to the south. Now that Chicopee border in 1809 was actually moved upwards into South Hadley territory. So South Hadley Falls was actually about 300 yards further to the south when it first started. And then towards the north, most people would say that the difference between the falls and the center has changed drastically, and that's true, because originally the falls was anything outside of the center. So the center was mostly right around the college area, right around the post office, and anything north up into the mountains, whereas the falls is anything else. But that has shifted, and most people would say that the falls area now end at Route 202. Now, the last border would be the east, and even that border was greater in the past. It would have gone up to Granby, but that's been shifted. So the modern definition of the falls, most people would say that it's at the point where the uphill starts on Granby Road. And so you have the falls being a lot smaller than it was before. It would have probably been 4 or 5 times larger geographic area, but other neighborhoods have come around and it's grown larger.
So quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what are some of the features of the falls?
Okay, some of the cool features of the falls, besides the canal, you got the beach grounds, which is a beautiful park and playground area with many baseball fields and a great place for the kids to go to a spray park. Of course, I mentioned the cemetery, that's the Sally Falls Cemetery. Then you have the town government down here. So the town hall is based in the falls. Very residential, of course, many side streets. And since this is a very old area settled in 1794, it's not a gridded pattern. It missed that. Most things settled from 1840 and afterwards started with a gridded pattern. But before that, they didn't use the grid, so it's streets all over the place. Now, some of the other features are the library has been down here, the public library, since, I believe, since 1890. And it's in the third rendition at this point. There used to be 3 large mills that were on the riverfront, and that's been taken over by another park called Riverfront Park of South Hadley. So that's another feature. And then you used to have a school in this neighborhood called the Carew Street School. It's long gone. It does have some businesses, so there's some mills, especially off of Gaylord Street. And one of the biggest features of all, I think probably the nicest one to see, is the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Bridge. And that goes out from South Hadley to Holyoke. If you look towards the north as you go over, you get to see the big Holyoke Dam, and you get a great view of Mount Tom from there. And it's a great place because almost any day you stop, you notice that the river changes from day to day. The amount of water and the birds and fish life are incredible from that position. So the falls has lots of nice features to it.
And how has the proximity of Holyoke influenced the falls?
It's influenced greatly because the mills might have been started by South Hadley people, but those mills gradually shifted over to being owned by Holyoke Enterprises. And the South Hadley Canal itself was bought out by Holyoke Enterprises, at first the Hadley Falls Company, then the Holyoke Water Power Company. And they owned it from 1848 onwards, and they still own the land, most of the land on the riverfront of South Hadley. And Holyoke Enterprises have run a couple of the mills and changed their names into the Hadley Mill, the Hampshire Mill, so forth. And so it influenced it greatly. But the couple of greatest things of all for influence, there was a trolley system, and that first trolley system of Holyoke came over to South Hadley on its original line. And there was no electricity yet, so it was a horse-drawn trolley, and the trolley barn was in South Hadley. In fact, it's very close to the present South Hadley Library. And even when it got electrified, the electrification only increased the line through South Hadley, where the Sally Falls neighborhood got 3 lines passing through it. One was the one that went into the Falls neighborhoods. One was the one that went up to Sally Center and onwards to Amherst. And one was the one that took a right and went up the hill, up to Britton Street, College Street, or St. Anne's Church, and beyond. So you had 3 trolley lines. What does that do? It brings more people want to live in the falls. And so Sally Falls, which is not a trolley neighborhood, became filled in by houses because people saw, oh, we have a trolley, we can get to work. And the biggest influence of all was it always was a place for people that worked in the Holyoke mills that could live away from those mills in their own house. And the Sally Falls was one of the greatest places to go. You could still work there, but live away from the heat and the smoke of all those mills. So this is also a little cozy neighborhood of Holyoke, in one sense.
Thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours, and we want to thank our listeners again for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. Again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214 at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Goman. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. So now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself. Is that correct?
Yes, and I like the South Hadley ones.
And so today, Robert will be educating us on the Woodlawn area of South Hadley. So tell us about the cemeteries in the Woodlawn.
The Woodlawn has two cemeteries. They're both Catholic cemeteries. There used to be one there called the Notre Dame Cemetery, formed in 1891 by the Perpetual Help Church of Holyoke, Massachusetts. And they were looking for low-cost land to build their cemetery. It was enormous. And when they built it, it included all what is now the Monte Della Rosa Cemetery plus the Notre Dame Cemetery. The reason why they called it Notre Dame Cemetery is because the true name of Perpetual Help is the Notre Dame de Perpetual Secours. And the Notre Dame's in their name. And it grew from there. And it mostly has people that have Quebec ancestry. It has a mausoleum towards the front. It has a stone cutter also in the front of the property. It has many gorgeous stones, but nicest of all is a beautiful cross cemetery that's in the middle right portion. And there you find two plaques devoted to anyone of French-Canadian ancestry from Holyoke that died during World War I. And I believe that's 16 men, and they're all there. Now, some are buried there. It especially has a man named Narcisse DeRoy in that plaque. He's not buried in the cemetery. He's my grandmother's second cousin. He's buried in France, and his parents added his name as a cenotaph to the family plot, which is towards the back. So this cemetery is very interesting to look around. I have a separate cemetery tour around this cemetery. There's also the Monte Della Rosa Cemetery, and they started their plots within Notre Dame towards the modern Monte Della Rosa back right, and the old stones are there, and they didn't own anything until 1932 when Notre Dame sold them the land that their cemetery, Monte Della Rosa Cemetery, is on. And the church, Monte Della Rosa Church of Holyoke, then increased the amount of burials out there. So you can visit the old spot, and it has a priest circle also, where it's mostly coming to be Franciscan friars and some priests of Monte Della Rosa.
So tell us about the history of the Woodlawn area.
Okay, now this is a bit of a trolley neighborhood. There's some older houses, but remember that the trolley from Holyoke to South Hadley Center went along the modern day Route 116. And when it did, it went between, of course, the falls in the center, and there was nothing much there, and so houses started to develop. Now, the trolley's heyday was from 1900 to 1930, and a lot of the houses are on the side streets are from that era. So Woodlawn is a bit of a trolley neighborhood. You wouldn't say, oh, it's totally that, because there's already a lot there, but it developed a lot more, and it developed some more stores, so forth. And so the rest of the history of the Woodlawn is based upon those two cemeteries I mentioned, and based upon a lot of the farmland that was there in place. So a lot of the old houses tend to be on what is now called Route 33 in the farther portion. In fact, there was one family on that street, the Butts family, whose father had gone off to Baltimore for business, and on Christmas Eve, there was a fire in his house, and 4 of his sons died in that fire that day. So there's some sadness to this whole area too.
So quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214 @yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun, educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, what are the main features of the Woodlawn area and its boundary?
Okay, some of the features. It had a Woodlawn school there. It's now the Hadley Senior Center. It had a big shopping plaza, which is still dead. And it had a time during the 1990s where it increased in size drastically and then it decreased a bit. It has many residential neighborhoods. Most importantly, it has the South Hadley High School in the Woodlawn area. And that is gigantic because it has athletic fields around it. And like I told you, a lot of the houses are a mixture of very old ones from the early and late 1800s, some from the trolley era, and then some are mixed in, especially on certain dead ends in the Woodlawn, of the past 40 years or so. The boundaries, this is a neighborhood that defined pretty much by the neighborhoods around it. So once you start up College Street, that's the end to the north of Woodlawn. To the south, Route 202 overpath is the southern boundary. To its east, its boundary is pretty much defined by the area around the St. Teresa's Catholic Church, because after that you either get the center or the Plains area forming. And then towards its western boundary, it might go as far as Alvord Street, portions of Alvord, especially the ones where North Main Street ends. That might be because of the end of the Woodlawn section, and then the center and the falls are ended right around that section too. So it's a neighborhood surrounded by other neighborhoods. It's not the first and it's not the last neighborhood of South Hadley.
And tell us about the conservation lands in the Woodlawn area.
Well, there's a Black Stevens conservation land between the Plains School and the South Hadley High School, and that's a very large conservation area with many trails inside of it. Used to be a double reservoir in there, neither of them very large. There's also Titus Pond Conservation Land further up Newton Street from there. And just by having these conservation lands allows for a different environment. It allows within a very residential place, it allows people to have a nice hiking trail system in the Black Stevens area. It's also a neighborhood that doesn't have too many parks. So it used to have a Woodlawn school park, and it still does, but mostly the parks of Sahaya are neighborhoods around it.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can also tune into a large selection of our other podcasts and much more at his website. And again, that's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214 at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for tuning into our podcast. We are coming to you from South Hadley, Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining me is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. And he offers both public and private tours, as well as presentations of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, South Hadley, and Chicopee, Mass. Now you actually lead these tours and give these presentations yourself, is that correct?
Yes, and this is where I live in South Hadley.
So today, Robert will be educating us on his Plains area of South Hadley. Sure. So tell us about the 6 lakes in the Plains.
There's only 6 natural lakes in South Hadley. Lakes are actually pretty rare to have anywhere. Most people that think that it's a lake is really a reservoir. But these are 6 lakes, natural lakes in South Hadley. They happen to be in the Plains area. They're very close to the South Hadley landfill, which is now capped. They are in a conservation land called the Binding Conservation Land, and you go hike there on many trails. And the lakes have slowly disappeared. So they've been there a long time. I found them on an old map of almost 200 years ago. So they've been around at least that long. Why do lakes disappear? Well, sediment comes from the sides, falls in. Also comes from leaves. Other plant life fills in the bottom. Animal life, fish, fill in the bottom when they're deceased. And so the bottom of these lakes fill in, and lakes naturally do that and go away. And these are getting close to the point where they're going to disappear. And of course, lakes have their own ecosystem inside of them and around them. So it's very interesting looking at these unique environments. And they're easy to find. Just go onto Lyman Terrace, and at the very end of it, you'll see the sign saying Binding Conservation. And that's the start of one of the best trails to go on, easiest to get in there. And the big pond, if you go about 150 yards in on that first trail and look towards the south, you'll see the distance. It's the only one of the 6 that doesn't have a trail to it. So you have to bushwhack during the summer, and the other seasons you might get in there. It was a half century ago, maybe 10 feet deep. Now it's maybe about 4 feet deep. And the others are getting low in level too. Some are just spring lakes at this point, and then they go away. So they've really evolved.
So tell us about the cemeteries in the Plains areas.
All right, there's 2 cemeteries in the Plains, and they are the St. Rose Cemetery from 1875. That is the burial site for the people that attended St. Patrick's Church of the Falls. And it was on land owned by the brick maker Michael Lynch. He gave them at low cost this land, and it's been built up since then. Now, it's not the oldest one out there. The older one out there is the Precious Blood Cemetery, belonging to the Precious Blood Church of Holyoke. And it's older, and you can see some older stones in there. And it's smaller, but they're both nice little cemeteries, fairly well taken care of. And it helps define the area because you have a lot of conservation areas, parks, and schools, so forth, and a lot of residential in this neighborhood. So it helps keep the level of the amount of people down to a reasonable level in this whole area.
And so quickly before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or want to sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there he has both videos of the various stops along each tour and also past and present photos of the historical sites throughout as well. And if you are interested in setting up a private tour, you can email him directly at bobcat4214B@yahoo.com. And they are perfect for fun and educational outdoor activities for the whole family or for your group parties, especially those special occasions and get-togethers. And they are also good just for getting outdoors for the day. So getting back to our interview, tell us about the conservation lands in the plains.
Okay, there's one called the Black Stevens Conservation Land that starts down by Hadley High School on Noon Street and reaches up to the Plains School. And that one is really big. It has a lot of nice trails that you can go on. You can see the brook that flows through there. It also has a conservation land called the Binding Conservation Land that's off of Lyman Terrace. It's, I believe, the largest conservation land in South Hadley of 19 that it has. And in there, again, you have trails, and you also have the natural lakes that I told you about before. And you have a lot of terrain changes. It's good to see also the biome, which is the different types of habitats you have through there. You have pines and you have areas of oaks, so forth. You also have a natural brook flowing through there called the Leaping Well Brook and Reservoir. So you have these different changes. Now, also you have a lot of open space because you have the Buttery Brook Park in one part of the plains. And so you have all these parks, conservation land, and open spaces like cemeteries and athletic fields next to the schools. And so there's a lot of open space in this area. It's not as vast as Valley Center, because it has the mountain range up there, but it's a nice, and it sets a tone that, sure, you can have some streets, but it's not going to be extremely residential, and people tend to like it that way.
And what is the history of the Plains area?
Okay, this is the last of the four neighborhoods of South Hadley to form. The center was first. The falls came around next because of the canal down there. Woodlawn came next. It was defined as a new neighborhood when the trolley started coming through around 1900. And then the Plains area was settled before 1900, but not very much at all. A few scattered farmhouses. And so when did it become a village or a neighborhood? That was mostly when Westover Air Force Base came around in the late 1930s, and a lot of homes started being built at the very edge of Chicopee, which is nearby. The Fairview neighborhood of Chicopee is very close, and so the Plains neighborhood also developed a lot around that area. So during the 1940s and 1950s, you had many side streets being developed, and that's when it started to have its own character. The Plains School came around in the late 1930s, probably because that's when the residency was going to higher and higher density. But it never got extremely high density of people because of all these parks and conservation lands. And so it's nicely set, nicely arranged, and the boundaries of it are very important. To the east, you have Granby. To the west, you have the start of Purple Heart Drive, which will then be defined in the falls. To its south, you have the border with Chicopee. And to its north, this is where it's not as set. Approximately the plains will end when you start to go downhill. So if you're on Route 33 going downhill, that's when woodlands start. If you're on Pittroff going downhill, that's when woodlands going to start. If you're on Sunset or Pond Street going downhill, that's when woodlands starts again. And lastly, to the far east, if you're going on East Street, to the north, and it starts to go uphill, that's when the center is going to start. So that sets the tone towards the northern boundary. So I hope you enjoy this area, and I try to build up more tours as I go along, and I'll get more of this area as I go through. And hopefully I want to do a tour around the Bynum Conservation Area. Thank you.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. You can also tune into a large selection of other podcasts and much more at his website. That's holyokecanaltour.org. And again, you can email him directly for private tours or to inquire about anything else at bobcat4214 capital B at yahoo.com. And be sure to keep an eye out for his upcoming 2024 season tours and more as they become available. Thank you for tuning in.